My name is Anastasia Bobrova. I am analyst and project manager here at Cedos. And today we are going to talk about alternative models of rental housing cooperatives with Csaba Jelinek, who is a co-founder of Periféria Policy and Research Center. Today, Csaba will tell us a little bit more about housing situation in Hungary, and then share some insights about the alternative models of rental housing cooperatives in Hungary. I encourage you all to post your questions or comments that you might have under the translation on Facebook, and then we will have some time to answer them. So without further ado, I give the floor to you, Csaba, please.
Thank you. And first of all, thanks a lot for inviting me and having the opportunity to talk to you. And as it was said, I will talk about rental housing cooperatives mainly, but that will be the outline of the presentation. So I will start with a hopefully brief outlook of housing situation in Hungary and why we think that there's a housing crisis in Hungary right now. Then I will introduce and define the term of rental housing cooperatives, and I will briefly tell you about our experience of advocating for this model in the Hungarian context. And then as a third step, I will talk a little bit about MOBA, which is a regional initiative, and I think it can be quite interesting for the future of this particular model. And of course, then I will conclude. So in the first part, a lot of data and charts. And this is the first one, which is the house price index from Eurostat. And you can see that from 2015 until now, the Hungarian data is much higher than the European Union average. So housing prices more than doubled in this short period in 7 years, while in the EU, the increase was less than 50%. In this graph, you can see the same index, but with all the EU member countries. So you can also see that it's not only that we are in Hungary, we are much higher, we have much higher index than in the EU average, but it's an outlier case basically. So most of the other countries have a much slower process of house price index. That's this graph, and I have to apologize here because a few of my graphs will be in Hungarian. And I will try to translate what you can see on them. So on this graph, you can see rental prices in the case of Budapest. The line which goes above is the rental price increase. It's an average figure. And the line above, the green one, shows you the wages, the wage increase. So you can see this emerging gap between the wages of the people in Budapest, the average wage, and the average rental price that you have to pay for a rental unit on the market. So it's a similar situation compared to the house price index. And why does it happen? So why do we see these huge increases in the last 6-7 years? One reason for that is about who and why purchases residential units on the market. And this is a graph from the Hungarian National Bank and report, and you can see the different purposes of home purchase between 2011 and 2019. And you can see that from 2015, so since the last housing boom started in Hungary and in Europe, the investment-related home purchases increased and stabilized around 40%. So there are more and more people who try to invest in residential housing, which pushes out people or prices out people who just simply want to live somewhere. Another reason behind this huge increase is the similarly huge increase of construction cost indexes in Hungary. You can see here the index which shows you how costly it is to build a new residential unit or buildings. And again, you can see a similar pattern that all the other lines are EU member countries, and you can see that Hungary is again an outlier in this. The other outlier is Romania in this case. And you can see that just in the last few years, more than 70% increase happened in construction prices. So that's another reason which drives the increasing costs. And on this graph, you can see the tenancy structure of the housing stock in Hungary. So another more structural reason behind the increasing housing prices is how the ownership structure or the tenancy structure looks like in the country. And you can see nationwide data and Budapest data for the tenancy structure at the moment of the regime change. You can see that more than 20% of the housing stock was social housing or public housing, and it was a little bit higher than 70% of the owner occupancy rate, and the private rental sector was really low. In Budapest, the data was a bit different compared to the national average. It was more than 50% or the share of the social or public housing units. But you can also see that in just 20 years, because of mass privatization, the stock of the social housing units decreased to, let's say, 3-4% nationwide and 5-6% in Budapest. And what increased was home ownership and owner occupancy. And we only have estimates for the current numbers, but it's very likely that the number of the share of private rentals increased because there's a huge demand for housing right now on the Budapest market, and the social housing stock is still very low. This pattern of ownership structure is not just a Hungarian phenomenon. It's I would say it's something which is similar in other Eastern European countries as well. On this map, again from Eurostat, you can see the share of owner-occupied dwellings in the local housing markets, and the darker the color is, the more owner-occupied dwellings you have. And you can almost see the former Eastern Bloc border on this map. So basically all the countries who were part of the Soviet Union or the Eastern Bloc have a much higher share of owner-occupied dwellings. And it's also true for Southern European countries. So some researchers call it a super home ownership regime. And the problem with this is that it's much less resilient than housing regimes where you have higher share of public housing units and rental units. And another aspect how you can look at the housing crisis is what it has to do with public policies and housing policies in Hungary. And within Periféria Center, we made a research last year on the last 30 years of housing policies in Hungary. And on this graph, you can see government expenditures on housing in the last 30 years. And you can see different categories on what specific type of investments or interventions the Hungarian government spent money in these last 30 years. And one interesting fact is that during the socialist time, housing was much more a prioritized policy field. So a lot of money went into housing-related interventions and subsidies, which radically decreased after the regime change. The second interesting thing is that in all of the bars, you can see this yellowish part, which refers to home ownership subsidies, which are not socially targeted. So we can conclude that in the last 30 years, the one and most important type of housing-related spending or subsidy was different forms of subsidies for families, so for private households, to help them buy their own homes, and it was not socially targeted, which means that most of this money ended up with middle class or upper middle class households, further increasing inequalities on the housing market, and also being one of the reasons why the housing bubbles at different points of Hungarian history appeared. You can also see that this blue category, which is expansion, maintenance, and renovation of public housing, is extremely small all over this period. So right now there are something around 1 or 2% of public housing units in Hungary, and there was basically no programs which would increase that number in the last 30 years. And another problem with the Hungarian housing stock is its age. So it was not only that public housing or municipal rental housing units were not really constructed in the recent years. It's also true for other types of housing construction, so private housing construction, that it was much less than in the previous years during state socialism. So right now, almost 70% of the dwellings in Hungary were built before 1980. And the problem with that is that according to a government-sponsored report, 80% of the present housing stock is not energy efficient and not adequate for the contemporary standards of energy efficiency and housing quality. So we not only have a problem of affordability and accessibility, there's also the problem of energy poverty, which is, in the context of the last few months, is becoming a more and more important issue. Right here, you can see a map which shows the so-called European Household Energy Poverty Index from 2017. And the bluer the color is, the more problematic is the situation in those countries with energy poverty. And you can again see that Hungary is among the outliers here, together with Slovakia and Bulgaria. So that's another problem, which will be a huge one in this winter, I guess. So just to summarize this first part, we can say that there's a housing crisis in Hungary. There are estimates that out of the 10 million population, 3 million people are experiencing some forms of housing poverty, which can be related to affordability, accessibility, legal issues, quality issues, or simply the bad location of their dwellings. So 30% of Hungarian society suffers from some kind of housing related problem. And what we see on the housing market is that on the one hand, we have we saw a shrinking of the municipal housing sector or the public housing sector. So it's almost non-existent in the Hungarian context, and the remaining units, most of them are in really bad shape and really bad condition. Municipalities have no funding to maintain it properly. Above that, we can see a market-based rental housing system, which is becoming extremely expensive in the recent years. And of course, you have that segment of the housing ladder where you can buy your own home, but it's really hard if you are not from the upper classes and if you cannot get government-related subsidy. So the metaphor that we often use in Periféria is that we can imagine the housing regime or the housing sector as a ladder, and you can see some segments where you have some options for some parts of this local society. But what we can experience in the recent years and actually decades is that the segmentation of the market is getting higher and higher, and there are more and more missing steps between these segments. So if you're living in a municipal housing unit, it's really hard to go out to the market. If you're renting a housing unit and you cannot, you won't inherit, or you cannot get governmental subsidies, then it's extremely hard to buy your own dwelling. So what we can say is that there are many potential target groups for new, innovative, affordable solutions on the housing market, and these different parts of the target group include young people and students, but also households with just one parent, also freshly divorced people, also elderly people who live alone, and also people who have precarious conditions on the labor market and cannot get a loan because they have informal or very bad contracts on the labor market. So to put it in a more analytical term, I would argue that there's an institutional vacuum of housing provision in the Hungarian context. And by that, I mean that there are no organizations or institutions with the main profile of developing or managing rental housing and or affordable housing. So we have the state, which doesn't spend on public housing units, and we have the market actors who try to make profit out of their investments. And there are no other types of organizations who would be interested in building up or maintaining something like a non-profit housing sector. So without these actors, I think it's really hard to improve in the long term affordability related problems, because the market logic won't really change, and it seems that the state has no intention or no capacities to transform the housing market right now. And also you need long-term thinking for such institutions to exist. So whenever we look at countries where there is a significant non-profit housing sector, we see that it took many years and even decades to build up this sector and make it strong and make it function well. So what would be needed to filling in this institutional vacuum? On the one hand, transparent, stable, accommodating regulatory frameworks. So what states could do, or what the Hungarian state would be able to do without a lot of money, is to make a regulatory framework which ensures that such players can appear in the domain of housing and they can work efficiently. Also, it would be beneficial, or I would say even necessary, to channel some public support, so some public money towards this sector, because otherwise it would be really hard to establish it. And also there's a need for adequate and long-term financing from the market. So financial actors were willing to deploy something like patient capital or catalytic capital, which also thinks about the impact of their investment and not only the profitability of that. And also to develop capacities and to have smaller than later bigger housing purpose organizations who are able and willing to fill in this vacuum. And now I turn to the second part of the presentation, and here the first point is that this vacuum could be filled by many different types of alternative organizations or alternative models. So on the right hand side, you can see a small picture that I made. So what we are interested in Periféria Center is the affordable housing scene, or the category. So housing units that are affordable and people can pay for it. And also there's a larger wave I would say globally in Europe for sure, and also in Hungary, people who were interested in various forms of collaborative housing, which means that housing solutions are not deployed top down, but it's to a certain extent the result of the cooperation of people who would be then the tenants or users of such models. So we can imagine affordable housing solutions. So players actors who could fill in this vacuum, who are not into this collaborative housing type of state of mind. Just two well-known examples: housing associations, where you have a non-profit or a mixed body which has a housing portfolio and which is managed by them, and they offer it as rental units for tenants at an affordable price. So that could be one option. Of course, it needs a lot of capital investment at the beginning to build up this housing stock. A second possible solution is social rental agencies. Right now, we have some projects experimenting with this in Hungary with quite good results, but there are also similar projects in Italy and in other countries. Here, a social rental agency is an actor who is in between the owner of a residential unit and the tenant. And the rental agency, most usually they try to find vacant, non-utilized apartments and units, and then they contact the owners, and they have an agreement that they will they rent it out for the agency, which will then rent it out further for the tenant, for the user. And through this process, you can reach different types of agreements, but usually the main idea is that you rent it below the market price for some reason, and you can create an affordable price. It can also be run as a mixture or as a cooperation of public and non-profit entities, and also public support can be channeled into this type of model. But both of these models, even though they create affordable housing, they are not falling into the category of collaborative housing when the residents are also integral in the process of creating and maintaining affordable units. And our model, or the model that I will now speak about, and which we try to advocate for in Periféria Center since a few years, is the model of rental cooperatives. And here you have both. So you have affordable units in the end, and the collaborative process through which people are involved. Maybe just a few words about the co-housing model, which is also becoming more and more well known in the recent years, especially since the 2008 crisis. That's a form where people share their living space with their neighbors. So basically, you can imagine a residential unit where you not only have separate flats and people just meet at the corridors, but you can have a shared kitchen or shared common spaces for different functions. I don't know, working space, library, kindergarten, space for workshops, whatever you want. And it's collectively managed by the owner. So there you have an element of sharing space. And but the thing with co-housing, the co-housing model, is that it can be also both affordable and non-affordable. So we can see examples from Switzerland or Austria where affordability is not the main issue. It's more about collectivity and sharing and collaboration. But there are also co-housing models and buildings where it comes hand in hand with affordability, and also it can take up the legal form of rental cooperatives. So rental cooperatives can be places which are more collective, provide a more collective experience of living at habitat, but it's not necessarily the case. It can also be a more standard condominium type of building, where the sole purpose of collaboration is to make it more affordable and more efficient to manage. So in the following, I will talk about the rental cooperative model, but keep in mind that it's not the only solution. And also I think it's good solution for certain segments of the society in need and not for others. So very quickly, what could be the definition of rental housing cooperatives? So we have collective ownership in these. So there's a legal entity, usually a cooperative, which owns the building, and the people, the tenants, are members of this cooperative, and they have a collective share of the ownership, but they are not necessarily not owning their own housing unit, which could be easily put on the market. It's rather a right to use type of relation between the tenant and the organization. So it's stable, it's long term, but you're not free to profit from price increases and freely sell your right of use. It should be done in a collaborative way. Second element is affordable rents. So it's cheaper than the market price, non-speculative by definition. That's what I told about right now. So you cannot, so the purpose of a rental housing cooperative cannot be that, you build up something and then you sell it for 5 times as much in 20 years if the market is in a boom period. Also, it has a bottom-up democratic organization. And many times, so usually there's a question, how can you reach that people are democratically organized and efficient at the same time in a real estate development project? And for this, in most of the cases, when you have rental housing cooperatives, you need a facilitating group, or we can also call it technical assistant. It's a group of professionals who can guide these bottom-up democratically organized groups and collectives through the process of planning, building, and then managing. So it's usually it's part of the models that you have something like this facilitating group. And maybe the most important question, the financial side of such models. So how can you get money to build housing cooperatives? In most of the cases, and there are examples from Germany, we have there the so-called Mietshäuser Syndicat network. In Switzerland, there are many cooperatives. ABZ is one of the biggest and most well-known. But we also have in non-core countries, like in Uruguay, we have FUCWAM, and in Spain, there's La Borda, which has just recently won a prestigious architectural prize. So there are examples from very different countries, and the most usual pattern in financing such projects is that you have the own capital of the tenants, which is usually something between 10 or 30%. So if I want to be a tenant, I put in some capital myself, which is much lower than if I would purchase something on the market. Second element is something like patient capital as either a loan or as an investment. So it can be an ethical bank like GLS in Germany. It can also be an impact investment actor, but it can also be these microcredits and so-called friendly loans. I know that in the case of La Borda, there were many of these. So basically, family members, friends, or activists who are sympathetic towards the case, and they also invest their money here and not into other financial products which are not that ethical. So you have own capital, then this loan or investment type of capital, which can be up to 50, 60, 70% of the whole price. And also, in most of the cases, you have some form of public subsidies. It can come in many forms. So giving land for such projects, giving grants, which you don't have to pay back, or even helping these collectives to get loans from the market and through providing loan guarantees. So there are different types, monetary and non-monetary forms, but I think the experience is that some form of public subsidies can help a lot for these projects to start. And there are two examples from two pictures from one from Switzerland, one from Uruguay. So these rental cooperatives can take many forms, more urban, denser architecturally, but also having different, less dense forms of living together. So the next thing that I would like to talk about is obstacles in the Hungarian context. There have been groups, and there are groups, I will talk about it later, that are trying to establish such projects. There's one pilot project which is already up and running. I will talk about it later. And with Periféria Center, we have been following this process in the recent years. And I collected some of the obstacles, which I think are not just locally interesting, but it's most of them are something which is a characteristic of Eastern European countries. So getting a loan from a bank, which is usually the case in Western European countries or Northern European countries, is really hard in the Central Eastern European or Eastern European context. Because there are no such financial products right now on the market. So the loan that you can get is more expensive, and it's for a shorter term. If you go for individual loans or friendly loans, another problem is that there's a lack of formalized framework to collect them. So even though right now there's an EU-level framework regulation on collecting micro investments and micro loans, in Hungary, there's a super strict regulation by the National Bank, and it's really hard to, for example, launch a public campaign to collect investment type of money. Another obstacle might be if you go for equity investment. So if it's not a loan, but there's someone who puts in equity and through that gets some part of the ownership rights. Is that through that ownership right, that actor can at a later point have a say in what's going to happen with these projects, and it can they can sacrifice the affordability of these projects in the sake of guaranteeing their returns on their investments. So for that you need good contracts to go into this direction, and good partners to work with. With public support in Hungary, the political context is not favorable at all for such projects right now. And also, even though on the municipal level there are some politicians who are interested in that, but if you start municipal partnership, then with a swift change of the shift on the political landscape, some forms of subsidies can be taken back, which can be a risk for projects working together with local municipalities or state agents. And the national level regulation. So as I said, in the Hungarian context, there's no openness for national level regulation towards this direction, but also there's the problem of in quotation marks that there are quite a few already existing housing cooperatives which have the legal form of housing cooperatives, and these are dating back they were established during the state socialist period. We can call them old housing cooperatives. It's more than almost 300,000 units right now in this framework, but all of these are basically working as condominiums. So they became totally commodified, and even though we have a national law on housing cooperatives, it's totally shaped in the interests of these type of old housing cooperatives. So that's another obstacle if someone wants to advocate for a new type of cooperative model. And now I'd like to talk about the Hungarian example and what were the steps that were taken to go into the direction of new rental cooperatives. And so, as I said, there's one pilot project which is already up and running since 2018. Probably I have to say now that I'm also one of the tenants in this project. So it's so my interest in this whole field is not just the interest of an urban sociologist, but I also try to be active as an activist. And in 2018, we were able to buy a 282 square meter building that you can see on the pictures. And right now there are 7 residents living in this house. We got no municipal support or partnership, no public support. We couldn't get a mortgage, even though we had long discussions with the local so-called ethical bank, but in the last minute they pulled out from the deal. And in the end, we needed 50% of own capital and 50% of short-term friendly loans to cover the costs of this project. We are legally not a rental cooperative for various technical reasons, but we are working as if it would be a rental cooperative. And currently we can guarantee 60-70% of the market price in rents. So it's affordability works in this case as well. So this project happened after years of organizing and advocating and negotiating with different actors. And after it was finished and we could move in January 2019, we started to think about how to scale up this project and make it a movement or a network of similar projects. And in last year, we established the Alliance for Collaborative Real Estate Development, ACRED, which was founded by 4 different organizations. One of these is the association which runs this pilot project in Budapest, in the Zugló district. Periféria is also a member, and there are 2 other organizations. And the idea with establishing ACRED was to somehow institutionalize and formalize the knowledge that we gained through this long process and help facilitating similar projects. So right now we are trying to establish a 2nd house in Budapest, and we imagine our role in this as ACRED, as a facilitating organization that I already mentioned, and also at a later stage as a national umbrella organization of similar rental cooperatives, and as an agent of advocacy towards public or private actors in this process. And now it's the last part of my presentations, and how much time do I have? It's something like 5 minutes, right? 5, 10?
Yeah, 5-10 minutes, and it's fine.
Okay, so the last part of my presentation is about mobile, which is a regional institution, a regional project or initiative that we started in 2017 with 5 different, 5 similar groups from 5 different countries in the region. So there are members from Budapest, Prague, Ljubljana, Zagreb, and Belgrade. And we realized at a certain point that we are working on very similar issues, namely advocating for rental housing cooperatives and organizing them in these local contexts in Eastern Europe. And we are facing very similar structural obstacles. So we decided to come together. And in 2020, we formed legally a European Cooperative Society, which is a legal form, which is something like a cooperative of cooperatives on the European level. So in the last 2 years, we've been operating formally in this structure. And the main aim of MOBA is to to gather these international examples, to share knowledge, to build on this tradition of collectively organized housing solutions in the region, which we do have, even though they are not really mainstream, or we don't have very mainstream narratives around them in the region. And as I said, we have 5 full members plus 3 associate members who are helping us, and these are international NGOs mainly. And there are 2 existing projects, the pilot projects I explained in Budapest, and there's also one in Prague, which is currently being renovated. It's already purchased. It's going to be twice as big as the Budapest one. There are 3 others in preparation. So the baseline of MOBA, which actually means in Serbo-Croatian, reciprocal help in home building, is to recognize our common obstacles and try to work on practical solutions and help each other through that. And one very important part of our work is financial. The picture I'm showing now is an imagined future model, how MOBA could function. And what we actually have right now are the blue arrows. So on the incoming side, right now we had donations, grant money coming into the MOBA and into a segment of MOBA that we call MOBA Fund. And we have, as MOBA, provided loans for certain projects, most notably the Prague project. MOBA helps the Prague project with a small amount of loan. And the future plans, and actually we're working on it right now, is to acquire loan finance, maybe even social shares or equity type of investment. So basically, any type of impact investment or patient capital type of money into MOBA, which then could redistribute it in the region for organizations working on rental housing cooperatives or affordable housing in the form of either a loan, which is already exists, or as loan guarantee, maybe as grant, maybe even buying lands or homes and then renting it out for organizations that want to use it in this way. So that's the financial. So let's say the plans or the future horizon of MOBA that you're working on right now. But besides this financial part, as I said, we are also active in building this international network of the members and also of other organizations inside or outside the region who are sympathetic towards these cases. We are also operating a small-scale grant program. We had a lot of peer-to-peer exchanges and learning sessions. And right now, a big project of ours is a joint research on the potential target groups and financial channels of cooperative and other affordable rental solutions in the region. So in around December, January, we will come up with a larger report targeted for financial actors about the possibilities in this sector. As this one is the last but one slide. So here I just wanted to emphasize the importance of financing and the structure of financing in such projects. So already from the last few years when we have been active in this field, it turned out that it's really crucial and strategically important, on the one hand, to get cheap finance to do your projects, but on the other hand, to get it in a structure that allows you in the long run to keep the non-speculative, non-profit, collective nature of these projects. So here I just wanted to put this exclamation mark or pointing to the risks of how you can get your finances and from where, under which circumstances. And now I the conclusions. So what I try to, so the narrative I try to build up here was that we have housing crisis in Hungary, but I think also in Eastern Europe. So it's not, I don't think it would be a really particular case that I showed you in the first few slides. And at this particular moment in history, we can see very negative forecasts for the future. So energy crisis, war happening in Europe, inflation, probably we are sliding towards a recession. So it's really not a good moment to look for shelter and dwelling on the market right now. On top of that, we have non-resilient ownership regimes in the region. So a lot of home ownership, a lack of public housing and market rental units. So we can say that there's an institutional vacuum in the domain of housing, where rental cooperatives can be a potential solution, but not the only solution, as I said. So we need much more diverse new institutions or institutional innovations than just rental cooperatives. In order to have rental cooperatives, it's needed to have an enabling national regulatory framework coupled with subsidies. There's a need for new actors and also to attract patient and catalytic capital, and also a long-term thinking for which I think it's necessary to build up these larger coalitions of different actors who can advocate together for these changes in the structures of policies and finance. And I think MOBA can be a potential actor or coalition of this sort in the region, but I think we also need other actors to move into these directions. And I think I will stop now. And thanks for your attention. And I think now we have time for questions, right?
Yes, Csaba, thank you once again for your very interesting, informative presentation. Since we started later, so we still have a couple of minutes for questions. If any of you have any questions, so you can post those under the Facebook translation. But meanwhile, I also have some questions to you, Csaba. Thank you once again. At the beginning of your talk, you've mentioned some of the features of housing situation in Hungary. And actually, some of those features are very similar to Ukraine. For instance, if you look to the 10-year structure of Ukrainian housing market, then you will see that we also this super home ownership society. Before the war, more than 90% for housing was owner occupied, and as of 2018, approximately 8% of people in big cities, they rent their homes. So this percentage also of private rental market was small, and less than 1% of people lived in social housing. So we have pretty much similar situation. We also have this institutional vacuum that you've mentioned. But I want to go back to this thing that you've said, that this ownership regimes are actually non-resilient. The super home ownership regimes are non-resilient. Could you tell us a little bit more about why do you think that those regimes are non-resilient?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think there's it's something like a commonplace in housing studies literature that in a housing trajectory of a household or of a person, you have these big moments of change when you move out from your parents' home, when you form your own family, divorce, someone dies, you get old, and if you are so when you have a super home ownership regime, then when all these changes are happening, it's much harder to be flexible with changing your dwelling. So even though you won't need this stereotypical image of elderly people living alone in huge dwellings as a non-efficient way of using available housing units, but also so that's one part. The other part is simply because of the nature or the political economy of how housing market works, and we can see historically, but also in contemporary times, a lot of speculation going on. So basically, if there's a huge housing boom, which has no, let's say, natural basis or rational basis, it's just a speculative wave, then some people, random people who for some reason own their own units, can get a lot of, let's say, extra wealth or extra income, while others who are not owners at the moment, they are just left behind financially. So I would say that that's so growing inequalities that we can experience globally and locally as well. Huge part of it is because of the really commodified and marketized nature of housing regimes. And if in such a circumstance you have a super home ownership regime, it means that many people are, exposed to these waves of the market, which are non-rational at all.
Thank you, Csaba. I would also add that such ownership regimes also are not flexible. They're not very well during the crisis. They could not react very well during the crisis. That's what we actually have seen in Ukraine, because the war that started this year has provoked this unprecedented housing crisis. And we've seen that the housing market, which is also aimed at broadening the ownership, it cannot react very well to this large number of people who are now looking for new homes quickly. So yeah, that's also one feature they wanted to say. And I also wanted to ask you something about the second part of your presentation, maybe from your personal experience. You've mentioned some of the obstacles, some of the financial obstacles on the way of launching the cooperative rental cooperative housing. But could you also tell us about maybe some of the challenges that people may experience while operating and maintaining the rental cooperative?
Well, I mean, in our case, but it might be a little bit specific, is that, as I showed you, 50% of finances of the capital for the project, the money came from friendly loans. And most of them are short-term loans, which means that there's a need of basically continuous refinancing of these loans. So it's not like having one big bank loan and then having it for 20 years and you are just paying the interest and that's it. There's a continuous work. I think it's a specific situation. So the financial part, you cannot just let it go. So that's a continuous extra work. But on the other hand, you have much more affordable rents that you could get. The other thing that's again might be specific, maybe not, is energy efficiency right now. So in Hungary, the situation was that for years there was basically a cap or public support of subsidies on energy prices. And now this cap in the recent months produced a lot of minus for the state budget. So now they abolished it partly. And because of how we operate legally, we are in this category that has to pay market prices overnight. So until now, we paid a certain amount, and now it's the market price from one month to the other. So again, it's a situation when you have to move really quickly and you have to move collectively, which always takes time. But in the end, I would say that even if I would be a homeowner, I would have to deal with such a situation. And so at the end of the day, maybe it can be more efficient if people do it collectively. I don't know. We can talk about it in a year's time.
Thank you, Csaba. We also have a question under the Facebook translation. I will just read it to you. I am wondering how the current mass arrivals of people fleeing the conflict in Ukraine has affected the housing situation in Hungary and Eastern Europe. Would they also have access to alternative models of rental housing cooperatives? Do you possibly have any specific report on this topic, housing of Ukrainian refugees?
So sorry, I missed the first part of the question. Could you repeat that? So
yes, I can. Just a second. How the current mass arrivals of people fleeing the war in Ukraine affected the housing situation in Hungary?
Okay. Well, that's a really good question. And the thing is that no one really knows, I guess, because I mean, there's official data on the number of people who are crossing the border from the direction of Ukraine, and we know a number from that, which is hundreds of thousands of people. No one really knows who stays in Budapest or in Hungary and who moves forward. I mean, I only know some, let's say, qualitative or anecdotal evidence for that, and it seems that that it's an important factor in the local housing market. There's some some organizations from the very tiny field of affordable or non-profit housing sector, and they really quickly, and I would say quite efficiently, jumped onto this topic and tried to provide shelter or even more longer-term housing opportunities for people coming from Ukraine. So that's one part, but I think the majority has to deal with this situation on the market. I know about one specific project where an investor bought a real estate and reconverted it into a student dormitory space. But it was finished right at the point when the war broke out, so when Russia invaded Ukraine. And you know, this businessman had this idea that maybe it's the middle of the semester, so it's better for him to use it as basically something like a hostel for people coming from Ukraine. And it's you know, it's on a market level. It's not a really convenient space. So I think some of the market actors could react to that quite quickly. But I think it's also a matter of you know, the social background of people who are coming from Ukraine. So I also know some NGOs previously working on the homeless people's situation, and from their narrative, I know that there are quite a few Roma families coming from Ukraine without any resources, and they appear in the local social infrastructure, which puts an extra pressure on them. So I don't know any exact number on how it affects market prices, but it's definitely something happening. And since we have census in this year, maybe next year we will know more about that.
Thank you, Csaba. I guess that's it for the questions. If you maybe have some questions later, you can always, I guess, go to the Periféria Center website and then reach out to them directly, and also check their latest work. I know that many of their work is in Hungarian, but they also usually have summary in English. So I encourage you to go to their websites and get to know them better. Csaba, thank you once again for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you everyone who was watching us on Facebook and who will watch us later in recording. See you soon.